Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I feel honoured to have such a presence. There was just a few a minute ago. Okay, so today I'm here to present some of the work that I did as a postdoctoral research fellow. I'm going to present a study looking at factors associated with dog walking in 9 to 10-year-old children in Liverpool. I work at the University of Liverpool, but this study was also done in collaboration with some researchers at Liverpool John Moores University, just down the road from us. And the study was funded by Waltham and Mars Pet Care. So what do we know about dogs and physical activity? We know that in at least general adult type populations, dog owners are about 57% more likely than non-owners to achieve the recommended levels of physical activity. And so it seems that dog walking can be useful in terms of people's daily physical activity. However, we also know that just because you own a dog doesn't mean that you walk it. So that's another area of study that I'm really interested in, as to how people walk their dogs and what motivates them to walk dogs. Most of the studies that have been done so far have been in the USA and Australia, and most of them have been questionnaire based, although there has been an increase in the use of objective measures of physical activity, such as accelerometers. And these have confirmed the findings that if you own a dog and you walk it, it can contribute quite significantly to physical activity levels, which hopefully is good for your health. So what do we know about factors associated with dog walking in adults? This has been studied a little bit. Focus groups do seem to suggest that walking with a dog and owning a dog is a motivator to participate in physical activity. However, what seems to be most interesting finding so far is that it doesn't seem to matter so much what type of dog you've got, how many dogs you've got, or your socio-demographic situation. What seems to be important and associated with people walking their dogs on a regular basis when they own them is that they feel that their dog provides support and motivation for exercise. So it seems to be something about the relationship that the person has with their dog that means that they then make the effort to walk it. And we're going to come back to that later with some of my findings. There's been much less research into dog ownership and physical activity in children. Of the very few studies there have been, one of them has come from the UK. And in this study, looking at 9 to 10-year-old children, they showed that dog-owning children were a bit more physically active than those that didn't have dogs, by about 357 steps per day. So not a huge amount, but it definitely was a significant amount. However, they didn't actually look at the children's involvement in dog walking. They just looked at dog-owning children and non-dog-owning children and compared their physical activity levels. So there's a large gap in the research in terms of children's participation in walking with their dog and activity with their dog. These findings were also used to postulate that walking with a dog and owning a dog could be useful in terms of tackling childhood obesity and preventing childhood obesity. But actually this study didn't look at weight status. We have actually done some previous work, which I've presented before at previous conferences, looking at whether there's an association between dog ownership and obesity in childhood. And we used a cohort study called the Avon Longitudinal Study of Parents and Children, which is one from the University of Bristol in the UK. And in this study, we didn't actually find an association between owning a dog and the children, it was about age 7 we looked at, and the children being less likely to be obese. So although there's some evidence that children are more physically active if they own a dog, it doesn't seem to necessarily translate into them being of lower weight status. So that again raises a few important questions. So we're left with the questions of how much children are involved actually with walking with the dog or playing with the dog, those sorts of activities that could be good for their health, and whether walking with a dog is enough activity to actually prevent childhood obesity. But we do know that there are lots of children out there that are overweight or obese, and therefore this could be a ripe moment for intervention, because many of these do have dogs and we could use this. So on to the actual project that we did next. This is a project that is actually been quite established in Liverpool for about 20 years now. It's a repeat cross-sectional survey of the 9 to 10-year-old primary school children. So every year, the primary school children in the last year of their school go to a fitness fun day. They're held in different locations across Liverpool. And at this fitness fun day, they then have lots of fitness tests done. So things like the shuttle runs, things like the standing broad jump, to measure how their explosive leg strength. They have things like their grip strength measured in their hands. So lots of standardised tests for measuring the fitness of children. And this is part of a much wider programme, which then they can be referred on to sports taster sessions and after-school clubs and things. But what we were really interested in is this fitness fun day that they attended. So what we did is we went along to the fitness fun day at one of the centres and collected some data. So we went along to the Wavertree Centre, which is an area of Liverpool, in October, November 2010, and we sampled just over 1,000 9 to 10-year-old children that were attending these fitness fun days, and they were within 31 schools. And so whilst they were going around all the little activity stations doing their different things, one of the stations was me and some helpers, and they came and they filled in our questionnaire for us, and the people running the thing thought it was great because it kept the children occupied for a second in between their running around crazy, calm them down a bit. We had a very good response rate because the children were there and they had nothing else to do. So we managed to collect just over 1,000 children's data. If we did miss children, it was because there simply wasn't time to do all the children in that session, because sometimes we had a lot of schools attending one morning or afternoon session, and there wasn't time to get through them all. And we also had a lot of demographic data given, so we had things like ethnicity and home postcode, which were given on the consent forms from the parents for the study. And we could use that data to calculate deprivation scores for where the child lives, which is a good measure of their socioeconomic status. So in terms of the actual questionnaire that we used, we're going to be presenting some more, another study this afternoon. Alex German is going to be talking in more general about the answers we got from the questionnaire in terms of pet ownership and pet attachment. But what I was most interested in for this part of the study was dog walking. But we did ask them, the children, to tell us about what pets they owned and how long they'd had them. If they owned dogs, we had space for them to write about up to 3 different dogs that they owned and tell us what type of dog it was and how often it was walked and things. We also had something in there called the SendShare Pet Attachment Scale, which is not something we designed, it was something we've taken from that's been previously designed and used in studies, where for the child had to choose one pet that they owned, their favourite one, and it was normally the dog if they had dogs in the household. And they had to then fill in this attachment scale, answer these questions, individual questions. So things like, within your family, your pet likes you best. Do you agree with that almost always, or across to almost never? And from this, how they answer these questions, you can calculate a continuous score of the level of attachment or the intensity of the relationship they have with the animal. So that was quite important. And of course, we also asked them questions about their participation in dog walking. We tried to keep it pretty simple because, of course, these are 9 to 10-year-old children. So if they owned a dog, we asked them specific questions about how often they walked with that dog. So we asked, how often do you walk with your dogs? And it was never once a week or less, several times a week, or once a day or more. So fairly simple for them to fill in. We also asked a slightly different question. Because different dogs are walked at different frequencies, we also asked who usually walks the dog. So the dog might only be walked once a week, but the child always goes with them, then they would say, yes, I usually walk the dog. And it also gave us an indication of who else in the family or friends were the primary people that had responsibilities for walking the dog. Those were the questions for the children that own dogs. But obviously there might be quite a lot of children who, although they don't own a dog themselves, they have contact with dogs of friends or family members and participate in walking with them. So there was another question for all children, which did ask, how often do you walk with the dog, either yours or someone else's? And again, a similar range of answers they could give. So in terms of data analysis, we used binary logistic regression models for a number of different outcomes. So I categorised it into never or once a week versus several times a week or more in participation in dog walking. So we had the outcome of walking with any dog, whether it was yours or somebody else's. Walking with your own dog was obviously an important one. And we also modelled the finding as whether they indicated that their friend walks with the dog or not. And we used multivariable modelling here so that we could adjust for lots of fixed effects. So we could adjust for things like their gender, their ethnicity, how many brothers and sisters and things they have, because that can be important in terms of relationship they have with an animal. We'll talk about that more later in our other talk. We adjusted for things like socioeconomic status in terms of this deprivation score, whether they own single or multiple dogs, and what type of dog they got, and obviously the attachment to the dog. We also tested our models using a hierarchical structure in a program called MLWin, because actually these children are grouped within schools. They're not totally independent. So we did adjust for the school level clustering, but we found it made pretty much no difference to the findings. So in terms of results, about 37% of the children reported owning a dog, ranging from 1 to 2 children, I think, that had 9 dogs. I hope they were telling the truth. And we asked some questions about dog walking. And if we look at all the children that were asked how often they walk with a dog, either their own or somebody else's, so any dog, about 15% said that they walked every day with a dog. And about 43% said that they never walk with a dog. For those children who had their own dog, we'd asked separately whether how often they walked with their own dog, and about 35% said that they walked every day or more with their dog, and about 9% said that they never walked with their own dog. And not surprisingly, it was the children that owned dogs that were more likely to report walking with a dog, and they were about 12 times more likely. We found that about 41% of children indicated that they did not usually walk with their dog. So they got a dog, but they didn't usually participate in the walking in it. But interestingly, when we looked at the other questions about the dogs that they had and how often those dogs were taken for a walk, only about 4% of dogs were reportedly never walked. So that does show scope, not even for increasing the amount of walks that the dog gets, but just increasing the amount of participation that the children have in the already dog walking duties in the household. In terms of who walks with the dog, obviously quite a lot of children said that they do walk with the dog usually, about 60%. Mums and dads were quite equal in how often they were reported to walk with the dog, and the brothers and sisters a bit less. And then about 15% of children indicated that their friends walk with the dog as well. In terms of factors associated with dog walking, the most important thing that we found was that this attachment score, so how attached the intensity of relationship they had with the dog, measured by the centre attachment scale, was highly associated with the child walking with the dog on a regular basis. So here we can see never and once a week. I think centre score, the lower the score is, the more attached they are. So never and once a week are much higher than several times a week or once a day or more. But we found no evidence that things such as gender, ethnicity, their sibling status, their socioeconomic status was associated with dog walking. We did find that non-whites seemed to be more likely to report friends walking with their dog, which was quite interesting. However, if we add what the dog type was into the model, in terms of whether the dog was reported to be a pit bull type, and there seems to be quite a few of these in this area of Liverpool, if you add this into the model, it was children that reported owning pit bulls were about 10 times more likely to report friends walking with their dog. And this association with ethnicity disappears. It seems to be that the non-whites in Liverpool tend to be more likely to own pit bulls, and this is where this is coming from. And this is really quite interesting because we think of the pit bull type as being a social status type dog. It's talked about in that way. And they were actually, these children reporting that their friends are involved with dog walking. So to summarise the findings to date in this study area, there's good evidence that that adults that own dogs and possibly children that own dogs are more physically active. We seem to know that. But there's slightly weaker evidence to suggest that adults or children are less likely to be obese. due to this increased physical activity through dog walking. So that's an area we need to investigate. We think that walking pet dogs may be an underutilised opportunity for physical activity in children and adults, and seeing as they're already there in the home, then that seems to be, could be a right place for intervention. It's not, as people think, that we're just trying to get everybody to own dogs to make them more physically active. These dogs are already there in the home and could be walked more with the children and with the adults. And walking pet dogs, and in both adults and children, it appears that attachment to the dog is an important predictor of whether they walk the dog. Now, we don't know whether it's walking the dog that increases your attachment and your relationship with the dog, or whether if you increase your attachment relationship with the dog, you then want to walk it more. It's probably actually a bit of both. But this is really interesting in terms of intervention design. If we're going to design interventions to try and get children and adults more physically active with their dogs, we have to not just think about prescribing them to go on walks, we have to think about the relationship that they have with the animal and how maybe we can improve that, or whether the relationship is going to improve through this increased walking. It's a factor we need to think about. So thank you for listening to me today. This afternoon, about 3:10, my colleague Alex German is going to be presenting some other findings from this study, looking at the pet ownership and the attachment within this study. So thank you very much.